Hello, everybody, and welcome to the TeacherCast Educational Network. My name is Jeff Bradbury. Thank you so much for joining us today and making TeacherCast your home for professional development. This is the Jeff Bradbury Show, episode number 56. Today, I am excited to have a fantastic guest on today doing one of my favorite topics. Today, we're talking all about music and sound. And as you guys know from following me, my roots are music education. I was a music educator for 20 years, conducting, playing in orchestras. I am so excited to have my guest on the show today. We're going to talk about not only his journey through being a fantastic jazz musician, but also on a fantastic new book that he just released. And I'm really excited to share all of this with you guys. This is the first time you're listening to this show. Thank you so much for being here. You can, of course, check out all of our archives over at teachercast.net/podcast. And we hope that you guys like and subscribe this. We are, of course, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you guys get your audio and video shows. My guest today, as I mentioned, is a fantastic jazz musician and also the author of a book called Creative Sound Play for Young Learners. I want to bring on today my good friend, Mr. Hayes Greenfield. Hayes, how are you today? Welcome to TeacherCast.
Thank you so much, Jeff. It's beautiful to be here. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and to speak with your audience.
I am so excited that you're here. I've been looking forward to this conversation. In 13 years of doing this, I could probably count on 3 or 4 fingers the opportunities that I've had to actually interview music teachers, musicians,
wow.
And you have had an amazing career. You've done a lot in the world of jazz. You've done a lot of world in composing and playing. And tell us a little bit about who is Hayes Greenfield.
Hayes Greenfield is a musician and a sound artist, an electroacoustic musician as well, a composer. I've worked with sound design, an educator. I love sharing what I do with young people of all ages, from 0 to 103. And, and lately I've been heavily involved with creative sound play.
And talk to us a little bit about that. We were talking about this before the recording. How did you come up with this concept? What is it? And how can we learn more about it?
Okay, so first of all, for any of you pre-K teachers out there who are listening, this has absolutely nothing to do with music. Nothing. And I appreciate, Jeff, you sharing everybody my expertise as a musician. And I am a master musician. I've been on the scene for quite a long time and have records out and all that stuff. But for teachers, this is about sound, and it's about something that we can all do very easily. And all we focus on is pitch. Can you give me a high pitch sound?
Wow.
Now, can you give me a low pitch sound? Okay, now can you give me a sound that's not like a not that you're humming? Can you like make a bird sound, a tweet for me? Give me a tweet. Oh, okay, so you're doing some effects there. But I want to hear you vocalize a bird.
Oh, I was not prepared for this. Tweet? Tweety tweet?
Tweet, 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 tweet.
How's that?
Tip, 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 tip. Now, can you give me a lion's roar?
I don't have that one programmed here.
Okay, Jeff. Okay, a trombone. That's wonderful. But here's the secret. So for all the teachers out there, for everybody out there, what's the one thing that everybody absolutely loves to do? They love to plug into it. And as kids do it. Especially, we make sound. We all love to make sound. You love to make sound. You love to listen to sound. You love to conduct people making sound. So, sound is pitch high like a bird, tweet, 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 low like a lion's roar, loud. Can you hear me being soft like that? Can you hear me being soft?
Yes.
And long. and short, like one clap. And that's what sound is. And children adore making sound, and children adore making an intentional sound in a deliberate way. So as soon as we plug into working with the child, anybody really, making sound, we're beginning to develop their executive function skills. And this is inhibitory control, working memory, cognitive flexibility. And because sound making is in general is collaborative, like orchestras and bands and people on the subway riding together or whatever, that it's about social emotional learning. Because we're doing it, we're having fun. And so that's kind of like the basic element of it. And yeah, you got another question for me? I mean, I could keep rolling, you know.
Well, you know, it's interesting because as educators here, we're always looking for different ways for our students to communicate with each other, with our students to communicate with us, to have them have that
Right.
competence of standing up and projecting. I mean, even myself going into teaching middle school this year, you know, one of my main functions is having a kid stand up and just be able to be comfortable in their own body to share themselves, to talk about yourselves, to do all of that stuff. And, you know, whether that's with a slide presentation or with a saxophone or with their hands
Right.
and their mouths, it's all about having that confidence to express and to have expression on your life.
Beautiful, beautiful. So what I'm focusing on in pre-K, and this is really kind of like I've zeroed in, what is the time of day that is the most challenging time for teachers?
I would have to say between 11 and 1.
Okay, I'm not referring to necessarily. That was a trick question. I didn't say it properly, but it's the most challenging times of the day for teachers in pre-K is transition times, right? And transitions happen every 30 minutes,
Right.
right? Getting the kids from the floor to the tables, getting them to put on their coats, getting them to go outside, getting them to go down the hall for lunch, getting them to sit to nap, getting up from a nap, getting them to clean up, getting them to move from, you know, the puzzle area to somewhere else, whatever we're working on. So transitions present a terrible problem for teachers because it takes a lot of time. And if they feel that they have to have a big suitcase full of tools, and what we forget is that children love to make sound. We've all tuned sound out. And when you provide an opportunity for a child to make a deliberate and an intentional sound, or an intentional sound in a deliberate way, those two are interchangeable, right? All of a sudden, it engages them. They focus. They love doing, there's nothing that a child loves doing more than making sound. And primarily because it enables them to control their environment. Because sound is immediate. It takes up space, even though we can't see it. And they don't have to learn anything new. All they have to do is just be their lovable selves. So, for example, here's a transition that everybody can use immediately. And why don't you do it with me as I start to do? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so what did I do? And you were just doing it. You were mouthing it. I'm watching. You weren't using your voice, which you should have. But that's okay. Well, I'm sorry.
Kids are in bed.
Right. Exactly. So the kids in the class. You don't even have to ask somebody to join in. 3 and 4 year olds. They'll jump in right away. And as soon as they do that, what are they doing? They're plugging into their active listening skills. Again, this is about executive functions. They're listening before they do it. They're following you. They're following me. So that's inhibitory control. They're getting a sense of the different ways that we're doing it. So that's working memory. And they're following kind of like an audio direction. They're not even being told, but they're participating, call and response. And they're going up and down. So they're dealing with cognitive flexibility. They're in a group. They're doing it together. They're having fun. So right there is a seemingly very benign and unimportant activity, which is really plugging into active listening skills, the executive function skills, social emotional learning, mindfulness, because they know where they are. And as soon as you get your kids counting with you, bam, the transition's done. And that's all of 10 seconds. Then we move the kids from the floor to the tables. So right there is a very simple transition. Now, in 20 minutes, 35 minutes, you have another transition. Bam! What do we know as musicians? What do we know? If we work out in the gym, we practice. And so transitions become these incredible times, these windows, these times throughout the day to practice. And when you practice an activity like that, just counting, it's so simple. And then you can change it up. I did it. I was at a medium volume, then I went to a loud volume, and I got quiet. And then I got quiet, and then I came back to a medium. So a lot of times the kids are going to stay up being loud. Oh, they'll come in as soon as they start. And if you do that a few times a day, in the beginning, the kids are going to all of a sudden plug into it. And they're going to want to be doing it. After they're going to take agency. After they become aware of it, because here is the beauty of transitions that we forget about transitions. Part of the problem that teachers get so stressed out about it is because they're so repetitive. But repetition helps children feel safe and calm because they learn that they know what to expect, what's coming down the pipeline. So all of a sudden, they're going to want to take agency. And I have teachers that say that the kids are lining up, and before they even say anything, one person's listening to who's going to start it off, and then all of a sudden they could be counting 1, 2, 3, 4. Because the kids, they got to count the kids all the time. All of a sudden, if you play with that and you add some fun into it with sound, it's infinite learning.
It's amazing how quickly students of all ages will start to pick things up. I mean, we as a culture are very repetitive. We're very call and response. We're very I do, we do, you do, those kinds of things. And it doesn't matter if that's a pre-K thing or even in my case, a middle school or a high school thing. Right. I mean, you can do that in a professional orchestra. And after all, that's part of, and I'm going to talk in general terms, that is the basis of jazz, right? Like you got a solo, you got a group, you got a solo, you got a, there's a form of structure here is where I'm going.
Well, there is. It starts with active listening, right? It starts with active listening, and then you have trust, and you start to communicate with each other. So, and it doesn't have to be with words, right? We can go zap zap zap, blah 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 blah, zap 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 zap. Very important, because when you start to do that, then all of a sudden the kids are really like, oh, whoa, that's an interesting sound. And then they start really having play. And this is like something for kids who have language delays. That all of a sudden I have teachers who come in and say, my kids they're being aggressive when they're hitting and they're grabbing because they're having trouble formulating the words or understanding the words. And so they're not able to communicate what their needs are. And they get frustrated. And that's why they're grabbing and they're hitting, because they want to be heard. That's what everybody wants to be heard. You know, you want to be heard. You want to be understood. You want to be helped. All of a sudden now, because this teacher's come in and has led these kind of quick focus warm-ups, blah, 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 this different kind of silly syllables, silly sounds. These kids who are nonverbal are going, or language delays, are going, wow, they're coming up with their own sounds and they're no longer being aggressive. They're just communicating and able to say whatever they need to say, even if it's not with a word. So and what her job, you know, one of the things that is really kind of, you know, what teachers provide is license and opportunity for a student to take risks, to listen in new ways, to discuss, to be sensitive to different kinds of things. So, like, for example, one of the things, and this works for any age, because many teachers tell me that they like these moments, this whole thing about mindfulness and being mindful. Well, if we take moments and just listen to our surroundings, actively listen to our surroundings, and then discuss the sounds that we hear. You know, like you could be out there, you could be listening and hear a dog all barking off in the distance and something else. Maybe there's some people out there talking or have some kids in the playground playing. And then all of a sudden there's a truck with a really loud horn right now. Is it a truck? Is it a car? And that loudness will obliterate the picture that's here, right? Because it's like, you know, and we can then take that experience and kids could make those sounds and tell that story right there. And when they do that, they're having the opportunity to make different kinds of sounds at different levels and different pitches and different kinds of stuff. So it's cognitive flexibility and working memory. And they're given the opportunity to do it together in a group, so it's social emotional learning, and to be kind of non-judgmental and try something new, and they'll love it. They absolutely adore it.
You know, you had mentioned earlier that the concept of cognitive flexibility, and, you know, especially being a dad of 10-year-olds right now, you know, my wife and I are constantly keeping them in music. They're playing, they've got 2 right now playing instruments. They're doing their thing. What is your thought on this of, you know, every child needs to be growing up with some kind of a music education background, being able to, you know, exercise themselves, free themselves and get that sound going. Why do you think that there is a huge correlation, or do you think there's a huge correlation between being able to have some kind of a musical sense of yourself and, you know, executive function, I would guess you would call it, later on in life? I mean, I find I do things a certain way because I hear pitches and I hear tempo and I hear a beat and I hear a rhythm in my head constantly. Where do you think that comes in, and why is it important that we start students at a very early age on that musical education track and keep it going for as long as possible?
Because that's about active listening skills. It's about an abstraction of how music is abstract, right? It's like, it's the closest thing to music. I mean, music is the closest thing to magic. And I think it's very important because it helps us it helps it build community. And so, for example, that scene of 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds listening to the people in the yard and the horn being loud, all of a sudden comes in and you can be playing that. So that's like a bunch of people playing a Mozart piece. That's a string quartet. That could be looked at as the similarity as a string quartet where everybody has a role. You know, there's the two violins, the viola, the cello, and each playing, one's playing the bass part, one's playing the, you know. So that helps to provide an opportunity, again, for, it doesn't have to necessarily be music, you know, notes on a page played with an instrument. It can be sounds orchestrated in a room. And that, what that does is builds executive function skills, which is what we were talking about. Those are the things that are so important to developing as a thoughtful human being. Inhibitory control is to think first, to not go on automatic pilot, to be able to follow through, to be able to do things that you don't want to do. Practicing an instrument is very difficult. And on a daily process, you have to do it daily, even if you don't want to. And the scales can be boring, right? And it can be something that can be very real drudgery. But you do it because, as a musician, you do it because you love the sound of the instrument that you're playing, right? I mean, that instrument, that is who that person is.
And do you remember the first time that you put an instrument in your hand?
Yes, it's, you know, yes, and I knew that when I wanted to play saxophone, I didn't have access to it. It took several years before I could get access to it. And finally, when I did, it was like, wow. And this guy laid me on a horn, and he put me in a room, and I was 15, which is late. And he came back into the room a half hour later and said, "Man, you're playing the blues. You're a natural." So I just said, "Well, okay." And I would just play for hours, you know, in a stairwell. And yes, and it's the sound of the sound. You know, everything to me is really about the quality of the sound and the quality of the line.
What was it about the saxophone, of all other instruments?
Well, you know, I was originally, I would have probably played piano. There was a situation that was kind of difficult when I was growing up. And I'm more intuitive with playing piano in many ways. But the saxophone's just got a human quality of sound. And when you breathe into it and it's your own, and it's, you know, I don't even know how to explain it. It just touches my heart. You know, it's like a really beautiful sound can make me cry.
And talk to us about making that transition from playing by yourself in the stairwell to concert saxophone, jazz musician. What was that adventure like for you? And talk to us a little bit about how, you know, for those of us who have kids of our own in music programs or students of our own who, you know, some of our kids obviously are in band and orchestra and stuff. What can we do to encourage our students to keep playing, see the fruits of our labor? Because as you mentioned, practicing is difficult. It's a skill that you need to keep up with.
Well, for example, when I did the Jazzmatazz program, I had a live interactive show that I did all over the country with a trio that I would take out on the road, and for assembly programs and workshops. And one of the things that I do in that, which makes learning scales much more fun, is a lot of music directors would say to me, "I want to have more of my kids improvise," but they don't want to do it. They're afraid. And I would say, okay, so I go into a classroom and I'd ask them how they were doing it. And, you know, they'd have the piano player playing the chord and the bass player would be playing and the drummer would be bashing pretty much. And the soloists would get up and, they're trying to learn their scales and they don't really know where the scales are in the instrument. If they play a clunker note, I mean, in today's world, everybody is so uptight about sounding wrong and sounding bad and, they'll play a bad note. And so they're very uptight about just even playing the instrument. What very few, the pedagogy is about, nobody really deals with it in this context. And you'll appreciate this, being a classical musician. So, I tell kids, I say, look, it's just like talking. We're talking about something, you're really excited about the movie, you just thought, man, it was amazing. And whoa, wow, oh, woo, blah, 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 right? It's all just line. And then you say, now you pick up your horn and you just go, boo, 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 by themselves. They go just something and I play it and they'll do something different. And then you get the kids playing together. But you get rid of the piano. Get rid of a chordal instrument. All we want to have is the drums going very simply. Ting, 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 ting. Really gentle, very gentle. Just time. Da, 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 with the hi-hat. Da, 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 right? And then all of a sudden, the bass is going. Boom, 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 boom. Doesn't matter what they're playing. They could just be playing chromatic notes. Then all of a sudden, you start to have the soloists start to play. And then this is counterpoint. So there are no bad notes. We've now eliminated the bad notes. And all we're doing is improvising and telling stories with our instrument. And all of a sudden there's a conversation happening between what you're talking about, the musicians, and how is that happening? And now, no longer does learning scales be, and improvising be scary and frightening and the nemesis. Now they become your friends, because the more you're able to play with the more you develop on the instrument, the more you're able to hear.
And that's beautiful advice. I think when you look at something like practicing as a chore versus
it's a drag.
Right. If like I have to do this, and we call it woodshedding in our,
right.
Yeah, you have to get through. You have to figure out some things, but when you start to have those conversations musically, it's another world.
Right, but there is drudgery. There is some drudgery that you have to do. But, that depends. It's like, if you really get into doing long tones, and then, then part of it is also, and here is very important information. And I used to, and I would teach this as well, that how you approach your lesson is very important, and keeping a journal and keeping the material fresh. So if you're working on, scales, which scales, how fast, so that's one area. Then you can be working on arpeggios, and that's something else. Then you can be working on a whole tone thing or a diminished thing, your major, your minor scales with certain different, and then you can take a little line. What four notes are you playing? And how many different keys can you play it in? So let's say you have 10 different things that you're working on, and maybe a tune that you're playing, the material, the repertoire. So you have these different areas that you're working on. You're deciding, okay, I'm going to spend an hour a day practicing, 15 minutes on those four things. One thing is going to be warming up and some technical stuff, and then into it. And if you write down every day what you're doing, and you say, okay, I've got these 6 things that I'm going to work on for the next 3 weeks, and I'm going to do them incrementally. And so maybe 4 days you're working on, the same thing, and then 2 days you're working on the same thing. And then one day you pick it up and all you want to do is do long tones. All you want to do is sit and play a long tone. Ba. And you're inspired because you're listening to it, you're really hearing it, and you're able to play that note quietly and loudly without the intonation changing, right? and you're really having a good time and you're lost in it, you go with it. You say, forget the other stuff that you were practicing. This is because you're so concentrated. And the next day, you don't have to do it that way. Unless the next day you pick it up and you can't wait to get to that sound. As long as you're like really being really deliberate and intentional, bam.
Well, it's one thing to practice for yourself, come up with what you want and focus on those things. It's a completely different ballgame to start really composing for others. Talk to us a little bit about that transition from, you're just a saxophone, not just, but I mean, you're a saxophone player doing your thing to suddenly you're scoring films, you're doing documentaries, you've got this, the career shift on. What was that like?
That was, some of that can be really, really wonderful, and some of it can be frustrating. Okay, first of all, it depends on who you're working with. It's really about, writing music for film is really about the director and his vision or her vision. The director's vision is what's paramount, right? Because what they're coming to you to turn to, well, and if a director really hasn't spent much time thinking about the music and what they're looking for, it can be very frustrating. Unless you have sometimes, like I have somebody that I worked with recently who I adored, and he really didn't know he had an idea, but was very vague. And I did a film on nuclear. It was called In Search of Resolution. Mm-hmm. And Bob is somebody I've worked with many, many times. And he kind of just said, Hayes, I don't really know where to put the music. And I know that you're talented and you're sensitive to this stuff. Just go tell your story. And he gave me free rein like that. And it was beautiful. And that was an opportunity to really but there are many other experiences that can be frustrating, where we got to fight with the director, and you say no, but at the end you got to acquiesce, Right. So I mean, there was a film I did where the majority of the music I wrote, she loved it. I mean, she loved it, but she didn't use it because at the end it was a documentary, and she felt like it took away from what was happening in the moment. It was the nurse film, and I totally understood. It was like, I understand, because it was there's so many poignant, it's a documentary on American nurses, and it's so tense. And, and then sometimes, and then it's, most of the time it can be frustrating because I did a lot of documentaries and the music is mixed low. So it doesn't really get the prominence that you really want to have.
When you wake up in the morning, you open up Spotify, some music app. Who's on your playlist? Who do you listen to?
Oh, this morning I was listening to Eddie Harris. Compared to what? You know that tune? Oh, it's great. It's the one tune that just gets every ounce of my body moving.
How so?
I can't stop. I can't. It's like, it's so hip.
Explain it to somebody who doesn't know who Eddie Harris is.
Well, it's actually Les McCann and Eddie Harris. And they're like, it's just soulful. It's soulful music that's got a beat that's just makes my feet just move.
Who else do you listen to?
Oh, I love Abby Lincoln. I love Pharoah Sanders.
If you could play with any jazz musician in history, who would it be?
Probably Thelonious Monk.
How come?
Oh, he's just so quirky. I've been very blessed with some of the people I've played with. Like I did some sessions with just duo with Ornette Coleman. I would say one of the drummers would definitely be Elvin Jones, because of his sense of time and meter and the depth of it, just the sheer intensity of it.
Do you prefer, and you know, there's so many different adjectives that come before the word jazz, but when you're playing, do you prefer larger ensembles, smaller ensembles, you and a drum and maybe a bass? Like, what's your ideal ensemble look like?
You know, I like projects, and I have one project that's a duo with a bassist, with Dean Johnson. We have a record out that's on Sunnyside, and that's a very important record for me. It's we recorded it live, and it's very intimate. I've been playing with Dean for 30, 40 years. So it's about just, you know, getting together, and it's like having a conversation. And then I have another quartet with Dean, with a pianist and a drummer. And that's, you know, that's nice too, because it's more of, because the chords are there. It's, you know, it's the drummer, and but as soon as you start adding drums, I think on some level, you lose a little of the intimacy, because there's this immediate thing that happens without drums, whether it's kind of like a trio for me, you know, I'm just only speaking for myself, but yet I used to love doing duos with Rashid Ali. So it really all depends on, like, you know, and then even like, you know, some of my music, one of the things that I like to do is I think I change it up, you know, so I might have a bossa nova, and then maybe kind of a funkier tune, and then something that's free or free based type of music, or there have been people that have really, you know, inspired me. Like I have a tune called Homage to Pharaoh for Pharaoh Saunders, and I also have a tune called Orneticism. You know, I wrote a tune for Jackie Byard called Byard Inspired. You know, so I have tunes that are written for people that have touched me, or you know, have their lives touched me.
Now, you know, you've obviously got this full album of compositions that is out there, that's in your head. When you're actually creating this stuff, is there ever a spot where you're writing it down, or you just have all this stuff up in your head and it's always going to be, then that's where it lives? Or, I mean, do you ever get a chance to actually sit down and write any of that stuff out into sheet music?
Okay, so I write out the melody of the tunes and the chord changes and the harmony. The improvisations, I never write that out. I could never. You know, I'm dyslexic. You know, which is part of what's, you know, I'm not a great reader. And so, which has also kind of informed so much of creative sound play. And this is something that in the last couple of years, I've really come to realize, because it's about intuition. Like, you know, you talk about, like, the questions about how do you get kids to, like, really become more aware of and why it's important. We don't teach anybody about really intuition. And intuition is a really important, you know, intuition is so much faster than intellect. Mm-hmm. You know, and it's about, and that's related to listening. It's related to, you know, how do we listen to each other? How do we have a conversation where we're not listening to answer the conversation per se, or the question, or trying to anticipate it, but how do you have, like, a conversation that's going in and around? Like, for example, you and I even have had this. I started off talking about creative sound play, and you've switched it, and I should be asking you about some of these questions, you know, because you experience all this stuff. I mean, what is it for you, for example, when you were conducting the symphonies, right? And you're sitting there, and you're really in the moment with the orchestra. Are you watching the music as it's going by? Are you maneuvering how are you getting the orchestra to give you what you want them to give you?
You know, there's a great question There is, and I was actually having this conversation today with a music teacher friend of mine. The answer goes like this: a conductor has one job, and do you know what that one job is? It's to inspire. The orchestra doesn't need you. They have everything they have is already on a piece of paper. You know, one can say your job is to start and stop. One can say your job is to make it go faster or slower. But right there on the paper, it says everything that you need. So how do you get an ensemble of 7 musicians or 107 musicians? And the only answer is you're just there to inspire. Now, you throw the extra added on of you now have a stage in front of you and you have people singing on that stage. Then you have the extra pressure of they're doing it in a different language that you don't understand. Then you add the extra layer of every time that you look away from your music and you look up, those singers are in a completely different spot on the stage and you have to figure out A, where they are, B, what are they sounding, and C, what do they need from you? And when you dive that back, isn't that jazz? Whether it be you as a saxophone and a bass and a piano and a drum, you're there just to inspire the next person to do their thing. Whether it be hold back and play that percussion line as smooth as possible, like you've already shared, or, hey, it's your turn for the solo, I'm going to let you have it, or, nope, it's my turn for the solo. Because as a conductor, there are times where you need to stand up and take control, and there's a lot of times, 80% of the time, where they don't need you. You're just there looking, as I often say, you're the one on stage looking in the wrong direction, not holding an instrument. So what is your job? And it's to inspire. It's no different than being a parent. I can't make my kids do anything. I can only hope that they follow the examples that we're all trying to lead here, right? And it's no different than being a middle school teacher. It's not my job to teach. It's your job to follow and learn, right? And so if you take the conversation that the stick doesn't mean anything. I had a conducting teacher once say it's the illusion of power. The stick doesn't make any sound. And there's several orchestras that are out there that just don't have conductors, period.
Right.
Hundreds of people on stage.
Yeah.
They don't need you. So what's your job? Number one, it's to look good. And number two, it's just to inspire people to do things. It's at the core, it is a conversation. It is call and response. Stick moves, they play loud. Stick moves, they make an accent. It's no different. So on one hand, you're not making any sound. And on the other hand, they are the sound. That is the instrument. Like the orchestra is the instrument that you have. So there's a lot of similarities between conducting a Mahler symphony and playing in a jazz trio.
So I had this reminds me of that's all very true. I never thought about it, and it reminds me of an experience I had with I'd done a film score for the cleanup of the World Trade Center called the Year Ground Zero, and I had gone to Ireland to record it, and it had like a 10-piece chamber ensemble, and I was in the studio, and I had hired a conductor because I didn't feel I could, that wasn't my gig. So I was in the studio, and the music wasn't going down the way I really wanted it. And I ended up just going and being in the room with the musicians so I could hear. I didn't hear it in the control room. I could hear it live. I could hear all the instruments, just air, right? And I just sat there, and as the music was being done, I didn't even sit. I stood in the corner, but I was just so focused on what I was hearing in my head as to what was being played, that all of a sudden the ensemble came together.
Yep.
And the French horn player came up to me after. He says, "Man, I'm so glad you came into the room, because as soon as you came into the room, I knew what to do." And it was startling to me.
Music is a human connection.
Yeah. Well, everything
you can define it as it's a predetermined, or I would even say a pre-undetermined series of sounds and silence. Right?
Sounds and silence, yes.
That's loosely how you define music. It's sounds and silence, all put together in different ways, right?
Okay, so what creative sound play is, because this is kind of like, it's really about the interaction. It's the interaction of sound and silence over the duration of time, which is really the definition of what we're talking about in terms of music. But I'm making it accessible because I'm only dealing with pitch, high or low, anywhere you want, how you want to do it, which kids love to do, and loud or quiet or long and short. And so anybody can work with this. And you could use it for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So that's kind of like, it is music, and I'm getting into trouble here because and Jeff, because I tell everybody this has absolutely nothing to do with music, because, and this is how I have to frame it, and this is what I was going to tell you earlier that I didn't tell you. I frame it that it has nothing to do with music because pre-K teachers are my heroes. And they realize they do it for the passion, they do it for the calling, not for the money. And they realize that they're the first formal teacher in a person's life. And how that child feels about themselves as a learner could be how they feel about themselves for life. If they're a good learner, if they do well.
100% agree.
Right? But a pre-K teacher, because everybody is so stressed out in today's world, and there's so much on them. The majority of them have never taken a music class. They don't play instruments. They all love music. Everybody loves music. We all need music. But what happens is they hear creative sound play and they go sound, and they think, oh, you mean music, the sound of music. This is about music. And they shut down. And they get overwhelmed, and they get stressed out, and it's like getting rid of the piano so that somebody can just play with counterpoint. It is so difficult. They have, and I understand it. It's like I'm not ever expecting a teacher to teach music. We're not teaching music. Creative sound play has nothing. It is all about music. It's just about sound. It's about listening to sound. It's taking those mindful moments to listen so that when a kid comes into the classroom and he's really loud and it's jarring, instead of saying, stop, you're so loud, you should be using your inside voice, you say, oh, wow, that was great. A little loud for me. I bet you can't do that quieter. And the kid says, no, I can do it. And they do it quiet. And then they do it medium. They do it quiet. They do it medium. They do it loud. And all of a sudden, they're realizing that what they do matters.
Yep.
That they're part of a community. And they're developing the chops. They're developing the technique because sound is immediate. It's here. It's in the room. You hear it. So it's like, as soon as teachers become aware of sound and sensitive to sound, you can have a kid make a picture, a painting, and have them make that painting with the intention of how they want their fellow students to make it sound. And all of a sudden, it's like, wow, man, it's like, it's Beethoven, right? Or it becomes a roadmap for how they want that to sound. And that's about creativity. That's about leading. That's about, the whole thing about call and response is it enhances children's self-esteem is if you're a good caller, and then if you're a good responder. Because that's part of ensemble play and it's part of leading an ensemble. Jazz, it's about how well you listen, how well when you're taking the solo. If you're taking a really nice solo and the drummer's bashing through it and you're not hearing it, the drummer, Art Blakey said the whole role, the great drummer Art Blakey from the Jazz Messengers, Jazz Cat, the whole role of the rhythm section is to make the soloist sound the best they can. Right? So that's where we lose our ego. You know, the ego is supposed to be like, well, it's about who's leading.
Yeah. It's that conversation. It's not easy. There's a lot of that woodshedding. It takes a village to raise a musician. At the same time, a musician can do a lot, but they always need that ensemble around them. The website is creativesoundplay.com. The composer is hayesgreenfield.com. We are going to make sure that we have links to everything over here on our show notes. This is the Jeff Bradbury Show, episode 56. And Hayes, as we look forward to what is coming in the future, I used to teach a history of jazz class in middle school.
Oh, wow.
And it was a history of popular music, actually. And we started in 1850, and we learned everything that we could up to the 1990s at the time. I'm curious where you think we are right now in the world of jazz music. Do you think that we're still in the infancy? Granted, we're 100 years in. Do you think that technology has changed much about jazz, or is jazz really that conversation between two minds, just having a musical conversation with it? And we can end with, where do you see jazz going in the future, given this digital world and digital technology? And again, if it all comes down to just 2 to 3 people having a musical conversation, is there a place for technology?
Okay, so first of all, there is a place for technology, and I do stuff in surround sound. I do stuff in immersive solo with a bunch of loopers and a whole bunch of effects pedals but everything is organically done with the acoustic. Everything starts out as an acoustic. So yes, there is, and I have a trio that I've played with that. I think the jazz is here to stay. I think there's all different kinds of jazz. I think the sadness that we're experiencing in many of the art forms, and it's not just relegated to jazz. I think our society we have tools now, and everything is systemized, and we have young people who are tremendous technicians, kids and people who are playing saxophones and every instrument, just phenomenal chops. Phenomenal. And I think that, unfortunately, I think that the simplicity of being able to just tell a simple story, that a line that can really move you, is no longer as important. It's when I came up, I remember, it was about it. You got to be able to play the blues, man. Mm-hmm. You got to be able to play a simple blues and really move somebody. And everything is so, just even playing a beautiful melody. The older I get, the more I'm becoming just the simplicity of it. Simple is so hard. To play something really simple that's poignant, that's not trite. A photographer once told me years ago, I was 16, I was 15 when he told me this. He said to me, it's really easy to photograph dark. It's really hard to photograph something that's beautiful and not be trite. And that is the most challenging thing. So I think that it's sad. I think that critics and people think that they're not supposed to understand something, and it's harsh and it's loud. And yes, we are living in harsh and in many ways very harsh times. But I think that the beauty, I think we're missing the beauty and the gentleness of it.
Is there a solution for that?
Yeah, I think people have to listen to each other. I think that's I was listening to a podcast of yours earlier with this guy Alex, I think it was two podcasts before. And he was saying that, his whole, like his drive of bringing people together and making a difference, that's what I've been doing for 30 years outside of, and that's what creative sound play is, and this came out of my work with kids with special needs who are autistic and some other issues. And, it was because I was listening to them. And I went, whoa, sound. And we're talking about just making high sounds and low sounds and no sounds and a clap. I mean, I had a kid come into a room I was teaching, and he didn't want to be there. He was like 15 or 16, just totally angry that he was there. Big kid, man. And he went up to the wall and he sat against the wall, and his nose was like literally 2 inches from the wall. I was scared of this kid because his arms were like, huge. This guy was big. And I was passing a clap around the room, and it went by him the first time. The second time he jumped out and clapped with us. And all of a sudden, man, he was happy to be in class, and he just changed. And it was about clapping. It was about having sound, being able to make a sound and be able to be thought of, not because of his body being scary, but he became my wingman. I got this kid up to sing for the class. I got him up to tap dance with sneakers on. So it's like, I think we have to listen again. And that's where it's like we're also sound asleep. We have to, so many teachers tell me, man, I am so thankful. And I think, maybe they don't. Maybe they don't want to do this. And they do. They just want to relax. They just want to listen to sound. They want to talk about it. They want to share it. And this is what happens. I mean, I have 3-year-olds that come into classrooms and say, it's too loud in here. And imagine a 3-year-old having that kind of ability to assess a problem because they're feeling uncomfortable, be reflexive, mindful enough to figure it out, and then to say it, as opposed to them just getting louder.
Right.
I walk down the street with my wife, and we're talking to each other, and somebody behind us will be there really loud, and we're getting tight. And I said, let's just stop and let them walk around us. They'll pass us, and then we're cool. And that's what a 3-year-old's doing that, and it's just because they've had the opportunity to listen, make different kinds of sounds, communicate with each other, just like you were doing with your students, with your musicians. It's just, and that I think is what's missing.
That is a beautiful answer, and I think a great way just to put a wrap on this one.
I have to say, Jeff, it's been absolutely a pleasure to talk with you, and you got me into places where I avoid, but we came back, and you allowed me to come back, and it was very important. I really appreciate it.
It's jazz, man. It's just with a microphone and with a podcast. That's all it is.
What instrument do you play?
Undergrad viola, master's is in conducting.
Wow, viola, man, that's one of my favorite instruments.
So you spend your career literally in the middle of the orchestra, right in front where everything's happening, and all I did was I stood up, turned around, and picked up a stick, and it was just like being at home.
And is your wife a musician too?
Professional double bass.
Oh, wow, far out. Classical?
Total classical head. Before you asked, total classical head.
So did you play any jazz? Did you stray?
No, viola.
But you didn't play. Did you ever improvise with the viola?
You take the music away from me, man. I
So you're the type of cat. I can get you because you're doing it with the orchestra.
Oh yeah.
So it's like it's a matter of.
It's coming out of the mouth, not out of the hands.
Yeah. Wow. That's really cool. See, what's really beautiful is that we're all so dear. We all have our gifts.
We certainly do, and yours is inspiring greatness in us all.
Well, thank you,
Sounds in silence. The website again is creativesoundplay.com. He is Hayes Greenfield. You can find out more about him over at hayesgreenfield.com. We have all of our links to everything here on The Conversation, both audio and video, over at the Jeff Bradbury Show. This is episode number 56. Hayes, thank you so much. Please come back. Please consider this part 1.
I would love to, Jeff. You are amazing. This is beautiful.
And if I'm ever in New York, man, let's go out.
I would love that. Where are you located? I didn't know where you're located.
We'll talk about that after we get done recording. Right. And that wraps up this episode of the Jeff Bradbury Show. Thank you guys so much for hitting this. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe. Of course, you can find out all of our podcasts over at teachercast.net/podcast. And I hope you guys have enjoyed this show. There's plenty more. We've got amazing episodes on this channel from people in the Olympic team, on the NBA, authors, business owners, website design experts, you name it. This is a fantastic show. And if you'd like to be featured, head on over to TeacherCast today, hit that contact button. I would love to have you guys featured on the show. And so on behalf of Hayes and everybody here on the TeacherCast Educational Network, my name is Jeff Bradbury, reminding you guys to keep up the great work in your classrooms and continue sharing your passions with your students.